So these are the topics that we'll be covering in this session: updating StatSeeker configurations via CSV import, improving data visibility through scaling options in the dashboards, reporting on threshold breaches, the StatSeeker RNA, and adding notes to the network event records. Let's jump straight in. So a couple of places where we use CSVs to import bulk data to update your StatSeeker configuration. Let's start with SNMPv3 devices. Admin tool, network discovery, add SNMPv3. The first tab is used to add an individual device, and we use the second tab for our bulk imports. The syntax for the data is detailed in the tab, but it might be easier to consume in this video from the documentation. Discovery, adding SNMPv3, and syntax. This is a headless file, so all 8 fields must be in this order. We have 3 mandatory fields: IP address, auth, and privacy type. And you can skip over other fields maintaining the commas, but don't trim any trailing commas off the end of the row. Something to note is the use of the device name. If you do populate this field, an entry for the device will be added to the host file, and by default StatSeeker will reference the host file with every discovery or rewalk and rename devices according to the content. If you've updated the server's naming convention so that it excludes the host file, or sysname supersedes the host file, then this renaming might not occur, and we can check the naming convention in use in the admin tool. Network discovery and advanced options, and the first entry here displays the naming convention, and we can see that this server is using the default, with the host file having preference to the sysname, but there are a range of other options you can use. The last bit on adding SNMPv3 is the update button. If it's unchecked, Discovery is just going to skip over rows referencing known devices, speeding up the discovery process. So if you're transitioning a device from SNMPv2 to version 3, or updating the credentials for an existing SNMPv3 device, then you definitely want to check this box before applying the update. Okay, onto geolocation data. So we head down to StatSeeker administration, and the last entry here, geolocation import and export. This is the primary method to get the data StatSeeker needs to populate your dashboard world map panels. If you want to use the map panels, then StatSeeker needs the latitude and longitude of your devices. The CSV syntax used must be one of the options presented here, and you must have a header row indicating which one of the 3 is being used. That said, the simplest method is just to hit the export button. This will generate a CSV in an approved format containing all the devices that StatSeeker is polling, and we can see that my server has geolocation data for a number of these devices, and I can update those details and add details for devices which don't have them already. Then save the file and re-import the data back into StatSeeker. So, dashboard scaling. This is about changing the default y-axis minimum value to better present metrics with low variability. An example that people might find applicable within their own environment is in the default network summary dashboard. You're probably aware that you can't edit the default StatSeeker dashboard, so I have my copy of that default dashboard here, and the issue I want to address is in the dashboard reachability panel. Now I expect that for many of you, your data is a lot like mine, with very little variability between the 2 series that we see, and it makes it a little bit difficult to see any difference without falling back to reading the actual values in the legend. I can jump into edit mode in the axes tab, remove the y-axis minimum value. It defaults back to auto, and the axis will now automatically adjust to the data that's actually presented in the panel. And now I can more clearly see how today is comparing to yesterday. Another location for this type of change within my environment is the default server overview. From my simulated network, the memory usage graph here doesn't really vary a great deal, but this is just a simulated network. Your servers might be a little bit more dynamic. And with that change, again, I can more clearly see what's going on. An obvious application for this is going to be temperature graphs. The temperature for many devices or racks isn't going to vary by more than a degree or 2, but you may want any variation to be obvious so you can keep an eye on it. Now, new panels default to auto for both the min and max values on your y-axis, so our examples are reverting settings back to their default. Conversely, for some metrics, such as where you're displaying a percentage, you may want to enforce that 0 to 100% so you can see at a glance whether or not you need to pay attention to something. Reporting on breaches. We're talking about threshold breaches here, and these are manually configured thresholds that you can set against your network behavior and can be used to trigger an alert when the threshold is breached. You can set thresholds against any time series metric monitored by StatSeeker. They could be CPU or memory loads, temperatures, data rates, changes in the number of VPN connections. Any time series data that StatSeeker monitors can be the subject of a threshold configuration. Now, prior to anchoring any alerts to those threshold configurations, we do recommend that you let the thresholds run for a week or two and review the output of those thresholds to confirm that they're set correctly, that they're capturing all of the behavior you want and only the behavior you want. And we can do that from the reporting console. We can see the default threshold reports here. The first report is the threshold summary, and this displays the currently configured thresholds on the server, name, the threshold configuration, and whether or not it's currently enabled. The second report breaks down each threshold by each entity covered by the threshold. The Adelaide router has 2 thresholds set against it, and the GI01 interface on that router is subject to a wide range of thresholds. From that initial threshold summary report, I can also select a specific threshold and open the second report filtered to just my selected threshold. And we can see all of the entities covered by this threshold. And if I sort the column, those with the highest number of breaches and the time that that interface has been in breach. Clicking on the number of breaches will open the third report, the threshold event report. Again, filtered to just the events related to the selected entity for that threshold. We have details for each transition into and out of breach and the ability to drop in a note against a record if needed. And of course, we can present that same information in the dashboards if that's your preference. Onto the remote network appliance. StatSeeker's RNA is a platform that you can deploy in areas of your network that are walled off from monitoring by your StatSeeker server. The RNA is deployed as a bootable USB or a virtual disk, and then it runs entirely in memory, so it can be deployed pretty much anywhere without affecting the host OS. Once deployed, you can configure elements of your network to forward NetFlow or SFlow data to the RNA, and that can then be forwarded on from the RNA to your StatSeeker server via HTTP. You can also configure RNAs to receive mirrored port or VLAN traffic and then pass along summarized LAN traffic data as an alternative to the flow data. Now, the RNA images can be built from within the admin tool, Traffic Analyzer, Remote Network Appliance. Every StatSeeker server comes with an RNA that's been deployed locally, and we can see that there is another RNA on this network, but it's currently disabled. There's documentation walking you through how to configure and deploy RNAs, but we do recommend that you talk to StatSeeker support prior to your initial RNA deployments. They'll have a range of advice and resources to streamline that process for you. And our last item is adding notes to event records. StatSeeker events cover everything that the thresholds we discussed earlier don't. That's the device state up-down events, interface op status changes, and the records for any syslog or SNMPtrap messages that have been forwarded to the StatSeeker server. The default event reports can be found in the console under Events. And here we can see details around every device state change for the time filter that was passed into the report. Both the interface and device reports feature a notes field where you can add a note relating to the event record. The downtime here might be due to power outage, manual error, or scheduled maintenance. And as always, we can present the same data in the dashboards. Here I have all device down events, all unflagged events, and all flagged events, those that I've gone and assigned a note to. We can filter the dashboard content based around those note fields. You might want to filter down to a particular reason, such as all records of devices intentionally taken offline, or you may want to exclude events tagged in this particular way, and we can do this with the same regex negative look ahead that we use with exclusion filters in our auto grouping rules. If you aren't familiar with that, you can just copy the example we have in the auto grouping documentation and apply it here. And that covers all the items that I wanted to address in this session. Thanks very much for your time, and I'll catch you in the next one.